When you look at billionaires nowadays, they're usually in the tech department, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But if we want to get to know the richest businessman in history, we have to turn the clock back about 100 years. In this video, we want to look at a businessman, and even though his death has been almost 100 years ago, but no one has been able to surpass him in wealth. This is the story of Standard Oil. Standard Oil was not a normal country. This is the biggest monopoly in history. This company was not this powerful from the beginning, but it slowly made its way up there. Let's go back to 1839, when a little boy was born in New York, and they named him John D. Rockefeller. John was the oldest son to William Rockefeller, a herbalist in Richford, New York. William had a few wives, and with each wife he had a few children, but after a while he leaves all those wives, including John's mother, and brings all the children under one roof with his girlfriend, Nancy Brown, and a weird family is shaped. Anytime John asked his father for money, he would say no. But he always loved to have money for himself to do stuff, and he would go work for his neighbor to have some spending money. When John reaches 15 years old, his father decides to take the whole family to Cleveland, Ohio. Since John got a taste of money, he didn't want to go to school anymore, and he was thinking to himself, this is just wasting his time. That is why he leaves school at 16 years old to go and find a job. The first job he gets, he becomes a bookkeeper in an office, and his paycheck was ridiculously low, 50 cents a day, which is about $14 in today's money. He worked there for 2 years, and even though he did a better job than any other bookkeeper, and he expected his boss to give him a tiny raise, his boss wouldn't do so, and that's because he was still a kid. He worked in this office until he was 18 years old, and that's when he decided to quit this job. He had some money saved up, and he gets a loan to go and rent an office. You could say business was in his genes, because from the early age, he knew how to make money. His job was basically making deals between farmers and stores. In the year 1857, while he was doing this job being the middleman and making money, he was able to bring in $500,000 worth of revenue, which about $50,000 of that was profit. After 1 year in Cleveland, Ohio, all the businessmen knew John, and they wouldn't believe that an 18-year-old kid is outperforming them in business. 1 year later, in 1859, the first oil well is found in the US, near where John D. Rockefeller was working. Oil was found, but it didn't have true value because there were no cars around, and that is why it wasn't that important to people. The only use that people had for oil was refining it and turning it into kerosene to use it in kerosene lamps. When this oil well was discovered near John's place, he was very interested and he wanted to know what takes place there. Any news he could get his hands on about oil, he would read it. Rockefeller came to a conclusion that oil doesn't have true value. The thing that makes it value is refined oil. And the most important thing that came from oil is kerosene. After this, a lot of oil wells were discovered in the northeast of the US, and a lot of different people owned them. When Rockefeller took a look at the owners of these wells, he realized that they're not making a lot of money. A thought pops into his head, and he says he should buy oil for very cheap and turn it into a kerosene in his own refinery. The most amount of oil that was found in the US was in Pennsylvania. In the year 1863, between Pennsylvania and Cleveland, Ohio, they ran a railroad. This railroad allowed a lot of oil to enter Cleveland. Since John D. Rockefeller was a true businessman, he realized now it's the time. There is going to be a lot of oil entering Cleveland because of these railroads. In the last 6 years, he saved up so much money that he was able to build a well-made refinery. John noticed that with the help of chemists, he could turn this useless oil into more useful stuff. And that is why he hired a lot of experienced chemists and told them to create the highest quality kerosene you've ever seen before. All these things that John was doing was paying off, because about 2 years of working made his company worth about $72,500, which in today's money is about $1,180,000. And that's in just 2 years alone. This was just the beginning, and Rockefeller knew he's gonna create an empire with this, because before this, nobody has thought of this idea. Until then, there were 26 other refineries in the state of Ohio, but all of them didn't have the quality kerosene that John had. But between the people, everybody wanted the kerosene that Rockefeller's refinery was producing. The other refineries weren't making a lot of money. And once again, Rockefeller has another genius idea. He realizes that he could buy these refineries for extremely cheap, and the way he purchased them was very interesting. He would invite each of the owners of the refineries to his office and show him the receipts on how much their refinery is making and how much his refinery is making. And then he would hit them with a deal. He would tell them, if you sell us your refinery, we will grow rapidly, and we will hire you as the manager of the whole refinery, so you will have a job and make more money than when you owned it. The owners of the refineries basically had no choice but to say yes, because they could bring in more money by taking the deal. 10 years pass. We get to 1880. This is the year when 90% of the oil production comes from Rockefeller. This is called a monopoly, and it's good to know that this is the biggest monopoly in history. This monopoly made him so much money that he basically controlled the entire railroad system of the United States. He would basically tell the railroad companies, I will pay the maximum amount for you guys to take my supplies. By doing this, he made the transport fees with railroad extremely expensive, and all the other companies were complaining what Standard Oil is doing. So many factories complained what Rockefeller is doing that the US government came to see what happened. When the US government realized what's going on, they investigated the company. They realized that when you're running a monopoly, you basically have so much power you can't even believe it. And the US Congress was thinking of ways to make it illegal. But you could say John was few steps ahead of the government. When he realized that the US is trying to put laws against being a monopoly, in the state of New Jersey, he creates the Standard Oil Trust. What a trust is that he basically cut his Standard Oil Company into 40 different companies, and in the end, all the money those 40 companies are making goes into John's pockets. But the monopoly rules couldn't go against this company because it seems like it's 40 different companies competing with each other. In the year 1890, John D. Rockefeller owns 20,000 oil wells. He has ran 6,500 kilometers worth of pipelines across the US, and more than 100,000 Americans are working for the Standard Oil Company. Rockefeller started his empire at the greatest time you can think of, because nowhere else were there oil wells being found. But when we get to the 20th century, oil finds its true value and people are looking for it all over the world. And it was mostly because of ships and cars being invented. On the other side of the world, Russia and Asia had a few oil wells, but the biggest oil well that was found in the beginning of the 20th century was on May 26, 1908 in Iran, and that was by a British man, William Knox Darcy, with the help of the Qajar dynasty. But let's get back to Rockefeller. Around the 1890s, when oil was becoming more valuable, and different wells were being found around the world, the amount of money that Rockefeller is making went down. But Standard Oil was way too big to be damaged by these little oil wells being found. In the year 1890, Standard Oil was worth $1 trillion. And John had so much power in the US that he was not worried about anyone finding giant oil wells anywhere in the world. He had so much money, he even loaned it to the US government. That is why until the day he died, his net worth was always on the rise. When John D. Rockefeller dies in the year 1937 at the age of 97, his net worth was about $400 billion, and that makes him the richest businessman in history. And you can't compare with anyone else like governments or Mansa Musa, which we made a video on. Right now, based on Forbes magazine, the richest man in the world is Elon Musk at about $219 billion.